Well, good morning if you are in Athens, Georgia, or New York City. Good afternoon or evening if you are in Berlin or along the Rhine, or good eternal life if you are in Valhalla. I'm Fred
You lucked out.
Plotkin. Welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. I have a very special guest today. His name is Clay Hilley, and I'll tell you about him in a moment. You'll meet him in a moment. But I want to say something. This is being broadcast on October 4th of 2024, but Clay will be resting his beautiful voice that day because the next night he opens in Berlin at the Deutsche Oper Berlin in Tannhäuser, which to me, more than Siegfried, more than Tristan, it's the summit of Wagnerian tenor roles, and he will be playing Tannhäuser. Clay is the recipient of an incredibly prestigious award, the Richard Tucker Music Foundation Award. He's the current 2024 winner of this very prestigious prize that really a huge list of the greatest singers of the past 40 years have been recipients of this prize. So he joins a very long line. Um, I want to mention that Clay will not be in New York for the Richard Tucker Foundation Gala because he'll be singing Tristan in Berlin that night. Um, and he will be much missed. But I want to mention to listeners, because I will be there on October 27th at 6:30 p.m. at Carnegie Hall, that the Richard Tucker Foundation Gala includes many wonderful singers alphabetically. Xavier Anduaga, the wonderful Spanish tenor, Jamie Barton, the fantastic American mezzo from the state of Georgia, Stephanie Blythe, the fantastic American mezzo from the state of New York, Janae Bridges, the fantastic American mezzo. I'm not sure where she's from. I think Illinois, but I'm not certain. Anthony Roth Costanzo, the fantastic American countertenor from North Carolina and from New York, and now the head of Opera Philadelphia. Stephen Costello, the fantastic American tenor from Philadelphia. Michael Fabiano, the fantastic American tenor from New Jersey, huge baseball fan. In addition to everything else, we share a passion for the same team. Go Yankees. Ryan Speedo Green, fantastic bass baritone from Virginia. Quinn Kelsey, fantastic baritone from Hawaii. Michael Spires, the fantastic, let's call him a baritenor, which is what he says. I'm not sure where he's from in the United States. We'll find out.
I think
And
it's
Rachel Willis
Missouri or
Sorensen.
Arkansas.
Arkansas? Okay.
Either Missouri or Arkansas. One of those, I
Missouri,
think.
Arkansas. He's an
I think.
Ozark kind of guy. Um, and Rachel Willis Sorensen, the fantastic American soprano. I believe she's from Washington State, but I'm not certain. And the pianist Brian Waghorn and Howard Watkins. And this is on Sunday, October 27th at 6:30 p.m. at Carnegie Hall. Don't miss it. It's really great. And I know 1 year soon we will get to hear Mr. Hilley when he comes back to the States, singing for us some Wagner, and who knows, perhaps something Italian. Anyway, Clay, welcome. You are the heart. You're like what James Brown, who is also from the state of Georgia. He was the hardest working man in show business. You're the hardest working man in Valhalla.
I
And
wear this.
along the
I
line.
wear it with pride. I wear it with pride. Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Fred. It's an honor to
So
be talking to you now.
thank you. Is there something about the state of Georgia that I don't know that Jesse Norman, James Brown, Jamie Barton, Jennifer Larmore. I know I'm leaving Clay Hilley, of course. I'm leaving some out, but a lot of really sensational opera singers have come out of the state of Georgia. Plus James Brown, who probably could have sung opera. Mad scenes.
Could be. I don't have any ads. I have maybe some hypotheses here. Maybe it's the sort of slack jawed accent where we don't have a lot of jaw or lip tension, maybe, or tongue tension, and all lots of times maybe students have to be coached out of that by
But
students from other regions possibly. I don't know. This is just a guess off the top of my head.
but and by the way, Cheryl Milnes, the great American baritone, teaches. He has his institute in Savannah, Georgia.
Savannah, yeah, yeah.
Um, I mean, I know that's a great state. With Atlanta Opera is one of the hottest opera companies in the world right now, beautifully run.
Unreal. Did you hear
Just
the
announced
recent
a new
announcement?
performance space. So
Did you hear the announcement that just came out that
they
the new
a $45 million
$45 million?
new
Yeah,
space.
yeah.
I know that.
Tomer's doing amazing things. So proud of him.
Thomas Doolin, who was a guest on the show about 3 years ago.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I always find it interesting when there are these microcosms in states of really terrific talent. I've noticed lately I've had a lot of guests from North Carolina on my
Yeah,
show.
I saw him. You had Miss Vicky a few months
That's
ago.
right.
I
And
watched some of your interview with her.
coming soon will be Nova Thomas, and I had Lucas Meacham
Right.
and Tashina Vaughn. Various North Carolinians have been on my show. But anyway, because Jamie Barton, who's a friend of mine, grew up in a place where there really was not opera, but there was a lot of family singing. And she told me that a lot of her learning of music and of instruments came because the family was musical. Was your family musical?
My family, not musical in the sense of formally trained. Parents and grandparents sang in the church choir. They could follow the dot on the page. They couldn't describe it as an F sharp, but they knew that it was a little lower than the G sharp. They just, this kind of thing. I was the first one to take formal lessons. I don't have any. I mean, none of my siblings. I'm the oldest of four. None of the other ones do music. However, everybody, as far as I can tell, as best I can tell, they all have a musical ear. They're not tone deaf. When they sing a melody, that's they got the intervals right. but neither grandparents, no aunts, no uncles. It was the story goes as follows. My grandmother on my mother's side, we called her Nene. She, many years before any of the grandchildren were born, used to just think it would be really cool to have a musically inclined grandchild, and often would even seriously pray for this to come about.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I say I've got nothing, especially considering no one else in the family was formally trained or even had much of a hobby music. No one even played instruments by ear, other than singing in church choir, these sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so perhaps my grandmother's prayers are the reason that I have the conservatory debt that I have.
Let me ask, because I'm not born a Christian. I know that there are various denominations of Christianity in the South and all over the world, and each has its own very strong musical tradition.
Yes.
And some are more polyphonic, some are about call and response. I don't know which denomination is yours, but what was the musical tradition within the church?
The musical tradition was a piano and organ. It was the Southern Baptist denomination, and the tradition was to have congregational singing led by a pianist and a music minister who's sort of beating the downbeat from the lectern. And sometimes you had an organist, but in my more rural, I was never part of like a big church growing up. It was 100 or so, give or take a few, every Sunday morning gathering together for worship. And actually, it was when I finally got the desire, like the curiosity about the idea of playing the piano. So the piano was actually my first instrument. I'm sure we'll get all this. It was not singing, or it was not formally opera. It was not classical singing, that's for sure. It was piano. Excuse me. It was trumpet. Almost a year before starting the piano, but I started those around age 9, and it was having sitting in church and just sort of glancing over while the pianist was playing and being like, but they're looking here, but their hands aren't. They're not looking at their hands. The pianist, she knows somehow or another where to go with her hands, and I think that's just kind of cool to look somewhere else and then just have your hands doing their own like seemingly like magical thing. And that was sort of the first I had ever was captivated by piano playing specifically. And I used to ask, actually the same grandmother who who had all the prayers prior to any of the grandchildren arriving, she would often
Mhm.
pull me aside at like, even when I was much younger. I say this incident at church that got me, curious about like how do they do that. I was around age 8 or so probably then, but many years prior to that, my same grandmother Nene would always pull me aside and say, hey Clay, if you'll take piano lessons, I'll buy you a piano to learn on. And I was never in my mind, I never at no point I was like, oh, that's not really an incentive that is inspiring my 4, 5, 6, 7 year old mind. But then lo and
Mhm.
behold, something happened around age 8 or 9 or so, and I started the trumpet as early as one can start in the public school system. At that
Mhm.
time, possibly the same now, I don't even know. But fifth grade, I'm like 9 or maybe just turned 10, and I started picking up the B flat trumpet, and so I had about a year's running start, we'll say, of learning how to read, like, at least learning how to read treble clef and,
Mhm.
understanding, how to count and whatever else. And then almost a year later, I started the piano. But anyway, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves here. But because you
No.
asked about
And
traditions, and yeah,
when did you start with the piano and your voice, or was someone else playing the piano while you were singing?
I never sang anything until I was in high school, years and years later. So fifth grade, trumpet, sixth grade, or maybe the summer after fifth grade, not quite before sixth grade, to start the piano. Kept those going, both those instruments going. Fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. And I think it might have been all the way in the ninth grade before I had ever joined the choir. And I just did that because all my pals from the band, were in it and whatever. It seemed fun. I never even sung harmony in my whole life. I
Okay.
say I've never sung, but I'm saying apart from like children screaming in unison,
Right.
children's Christmas cantatas and things like this,
That's part of
at
what I
church.
was wondering about your church background in terms of harmony.
I didn't sing any harmony. I mean, obviously, I had to understand chords to play the piano.
Right.
The piano's all
Right.
chord based. Um, but I never harmonized vocally. It was always just sort of singing unison and whatever. And that was all that was expected. I mean, no one tried
Yeah.
to teach me. But I was fascinated by harmony. It's the first time in my life I'd ever sung any harmony at all. I'm 14 years old or something.
Yeah.
And it's fun. And then the more I got into choral singing, the more my pals and whatever heard sitting nearby me. They're like, "Hey, you actually did you ever take voice lessons or anything?" It's like you kind of have like, you know, you sound like you might have been like working on this or something. And I was
Hmm.
like, "No, I've always been a music kid, or at least since
Yeah.
8 or 9 was a music kid." And then then I like singing in harmony first, and then they're like, "Oh,
Hmm.
well, they need a soloist for this sort of concert. This, just short little one page something or other, don't even know what, but you should try out." And then that's sort of where it all started. And then actually it escalated quite quickly. It was not very long after that.
Yeah.
The very next year, our school did a very ambitious project by doing the HMS Pinafore. Now, we were not a school known for the arts. We were not even a school known to even do even like a big Broadway musical or even a small Broadway musical. And here we are doing like Gilbert and Sullivan. Now, did you catch my email that I sent not terribly long
Yes.
ago? Oh, you do?
Yes.
Okay, so you saw. So I'm being dead serious here. Gilbert and Sullivan then became a passion because of this HMS Pinafore. But I don't want to get too far ahead of where you
That's
might want to take
okay.
us.
Well, I'm wondering because your most young men singers, if
Right.
they're revealed to be tenors, are usually not put on the track for heroic Helden tenors,
No,
Wagner
indeed.
and
No.
Strauss, and certain roles like Canio and Kalaf and so on.
Right.
But I'm wondering at what point someone said to you, young man, maybe Mozart is not your thing. Maybe Mozart was your thing. I don't know. Or Bellini or Donizetti. Did someone early on say to you, I hear something else?
The earliest prediction of dramatic, possibilities, dramatic possibilities in dramatic repertoire. I want to say it might have been Sherry Grunewald at my I had a Merrill callback,
In
and
San
maybe
Francisco.
and
Yes.
maybe yeah, I think the audition was in New York, and as was the callback. I want to say that might have been '08, and so I would have been 27. I would have been 27 before anyone made that prediction, and even then it was like something Lohengrin, something like that. Um, And then by the next year, I was up in the Boston University Opera Institute, and they brought in Matthew Epstein to give
Hmm.
one-on-one consultations. He would
Let's
hear us
just
sing
say for
a
people who
couple
don't
of.
know, because we have an international audience, Matthew Epstein is a longtime impresario, advisor, connoisseur. He's worked a lot with the Chicago Lyric Opera, the Welsh National Opera, and he's very well known in New York for hearing singers, giving advice, and so forth.
Indeed, yes, known as quite an oracle, as one who can predict these things from quite a distance. So I believe it was in '09 then. So the very next year, he said, and I only had sung like Questa Quella. I'd sung one Duke aria, and then maybe the
The
Jose's Flower
Rigoletto.
song, I believe it was. Yeah. And he was like, well, I'm going to say something that might sound a little shocking. I think you're going to have a huge career in Wagner and Strauss. It won't be anytime soon. Don't do it now. You'll screw yourself up. You're 28. You won't get any credibility in this for a long time. But just know that you don't be surprised if this is where you end up. So here we ended up. So this
But
is
what were you
2009.
singing then between '08 and when you started on the Wagnerian Straussian highway?
Let's see, what was I singing in mid to late 20s? I was singing things like Pinkerton. I was singing things like Pinkerton and Don Jose. I sang lighter things like Edgardo from Lucia. I had sung Alfredo. I'd sung Hoffman, which of course
Mhm.
Hoffman is, quite can be, I think, quite a robust voice.
Yeah.
Could be lighter. But I think I sang that in 2007 for grad school in Atlanta. I was 25 or almost 26, maybe. Let's see what was in the rep. It was always tough because I think people had an idea. I have, and even to this day, I've retained an ability to sing actually quite lightly and quite lyrically, like when it's called for. I can do like quite a legitimate croon, if I might say so. People hear this, but teachers in my or decades ago now, I guess, would hear that and be like, they would hear my ability to like really pump out like a great amount of volume. But then on the other hand, they were like, "Well, you got this sweet, this sort of sweetness, this lyricism in your voice." So there's a big question mark of what I would do. I mean, I'd done things as varied as like Fenton involves that. Ferrando, you mentioned Mozart a minute ago.
Mhm.
I never was able to find anything comfortable in Mozart until years later with Idomeneo, which makes sense, right?
Yes, because
Or Tito. I
many
never did Tito, but
many so-called big voice singers um, sing a domineo and sometimes Tito and La Clemenza di Tito. And what I'm
hmm,
about to say does not pertain to you, but I'm saying it to our audience.
sure.
Um, when La Clemenza di Tito premiered, it premiered in Munich around 1780, 81, something like that. And it was Mozart's first big hit. And it was actually financially the biggest hit of his career, not Don Giovanni or the others.
I didn't
And
know that.
it
Amazing.
was built around the existing company in Munich at the time. And they had a 70-year-old tenor who was popular, but well past his peak. And they had a lot of
Huh.
talented younger mezzos and other great singers, but they had to build an opera around this tenor. So they created music for him that was not as challenging as the other singers.
I never
So,
knew this. That's
for
great.
example,
That's just
Ben
great.
Hepner, Placido Domingo, Luciano Pavarotti have all sung a domineo, and it requires, great artistry, as would anything by Mozart. But on the other hand, it's a role that Mozart built without, let's say, the requirements of Don Ottavio and Don Giovanni, who really has to unspool this gorgeous sound. That is not what had to happen in Domineo. And as I said, you're in a great line with Ben Hepner and Luciano Pavarotti and Placido Domingo, so don't worry. But
I'm honored.
it, but it's a particular role in Mozart for that reason, that it was done for a 70-year-old tenor.
No, you say was this Tito or was this Ito Maneo? I
This
can't
was the
remember.
Domineo,
It was Ito Maneo.
because Tito
Amazing.
he did in Prague, and it was his last opera that he composed. And
Oh, Tito came
even
with
though
him.
Magic Flute was the last to come out, the last one he composed was La Clemenza di Tito. But
Ah,
but anyway, Domine was early on. Then came things like Don Giovanni. I'm sorry, first Le Nozze di Figaro, Don Giovanni Così fan tutte, di Zauberflöte, and so forth in La Clemenza. But anyway, this was hardly Mozart's first opera. He had composed 22 works for the stage, but basically we only do 7 in standard repertoire around the world. And it used to be just 5 until the Domeneo and La Clemenza di Tito came back in. But anyway, I'm asking because, just speaking very practically, the life of a young singer who went to school and has school debts and might be married and have other financial obligations. If you're waiting to sing Wagner, what do you kind of do in the meantime? Because I think Matthew was correct in saying to Matthew Epstein that you should not plunge right in, because I can point to many singers who started too early in the Wagner rep and they didn't have long careers. So I'm very glad that you waited. I'll be perfectly blunt about that. But it must be a challenge for a singer.
well, let's see. We say, did we wait or didn't we wait? 2013. Let's say I'm 31 at the beginning of this year when this. So 2013, as we remember, the big Verdi and Wagner bicentennial.
Yeah.
There's lots of big singers required that year, and I ended up
Mhm.
pinch hitting from the other. Well, he lives in Georgia now, but he's from Texas. Jay Morris.
Yep.
Had to withdraw from. I think he's recovering from the shoulder, some surgery of some sort, if I recall right. It was a little while ago now, but I ended up filling in for a concert of Valkyrie Act One. So I was doing.
Okay, but Valkyrie Act 1
Mm-hmm,
is 65 minutes. It's fabulous music.
mm-hmm.
You get to have sex with your sister at the end. And
Such a plus. Such a plus.
and I mean, I think that's a wonderful way to enter that world, because it is only 65 minutes. And
Mm-hmm.
your big sing is the last half hour, and it's an extraordinary piece of music. And
So it's really unreal. There's no misplaced note, is what I say.
not it's a perfect act. And when I try to introduce people to Wagner, I sometimes use Death Rheingold. I sometimes use the first act of Valkyria.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a special person, I usually use Lohengrin or Tannhäuser, but that's for people I think are going to be very open to it. But
Mm-hmm.
for the introduction, I usually start with the first act of Valkyria. But the point is that it's a gradual evolution. Let me put it another way. I recently had a conversation and recorded this with Renee Tatum, the wonderful American mezzo soprano from California, who, in addition to her many gifts, also happens to be tall, blonde, and beautiful. So that it kind of makes her look like central casting for Wagnerian operas. But she has the Wagnerian voice, although she sings many things, as do all singers. But I referred to it as, and I mean this only in the most positive sense, that if you know the show Guys and Dolls, the Broadway show, you talk about the great floating crap game. In other words, something that continues for hours and hours and days and years, and you're completely engaged in it. And to me, those of you who sing in the Wagnerian world, it's like the great floating crap game. You are colleagues, you are friends around the world. There's less competition than we perhaps see in Italian opera. And there's more sense of collegiality, of support. And audiences tend to understand how hard it is to do this stuff and how appreciative they are to hear everybody doing it incredibly well and with great
Mm-hmm.
passion. And yeah, she said, Renee Tatum said, yeah, the audiences are just better. And it's kind of exciting. They come knowing the music, and if they don't, they either sleep or they're very turned on by the whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
and they quickly get converted and they try to find out from people like me what's the big deal about all this Wagner stuff. Because yes, I'm associated with Italy. I worked in Italian opera houses primarily, but I love the operas of Strauss, of Wagner, of all the northern guys, let's call it. Um, and I think, therefore, that it's a very special experience. Did it happen at some point that you kind of said, hey, not only do I like this music, but I like the people who are doing it, the conductors, the coaches, sometimes the stage directors, not always, but certainly the singers?
For sure. Yeah, there's this feeling. Yeah, and this starts in high school. There's reason you got the reason that's the term theater kids. It's this little sort of bond that runs through you, and you end up with a bunch of corny inside jokes, and you end up late after rehearsals, out for late dinner and late drinks, and you build you build these great relationships around art, and just it's wonderful. There's something you know opera production, in Europe in general is so it's such a machine, and there's all the house singers that are all wonderful, and they're in three different shows at once, and the shows aren't as rehearsed as long if you're doing typically what you're doing is the remounts. There's way more remounts per year in theaters naturally than there are new productions. The new productions are the ones that get all the lengthy rehearsal periods, and it's almost like high school again. And that you got this, you're just sort of locked together for all this time. So that would be a slight cultural difference in the collegiality
Yep.
thing. I'm only a guest singer. I was never a part of a regular ensemble. Tons of amazing, wonderful friends who are, and I kind of sometimes feel like I am. I live 2 blocks north of Deutsche Oper Berlin, which is basically the company that launched me. But again, as a visitor, as a guest, and not as a
But nonetheless,
right.
when I say community, I don't just mean Berlin, which is a magnificent place. And by the way,
Yeah,
you know that fish restaurant nearby? There's a wonderful herring restaurant about 2 blocks away. I'll tell you,
wonderful herring. I'm not sure if those words have ever entered my mind, successively.
herring comes
I don't
from
know. Not not sure if I'm a herring fan.
sardines come from hell, and herrings come from God. Anyway,
I stick to my locks. I stick to my
well,
salmon.
that's good.
That's
But I mean, there is. I'm forgetting the name, but we'll look it up. There's a really wonderful fish restaurant if you live 2 blocks away. Um. Anyway, but the thing is, yes, there's a magnificent, obviously, musical tradition in Berlin. That's where Adagio is headquartered. But what I mean is that you, as you are doing this even more and more, you'll find that you often encounter many of the same colleagues who specialize in Wagnerian roles. And maybe you'll find them in Vienna, maybe you'll find them in New York, maybe you'll find them
oh
in
yeah,
Barcelona, wherever
oh
you
yeah,
want to go. London, they tend to be there, and not always the same ones, but you form these relationships as
yeah,
colleagues, as friends. And then when you're on
yes.
stage, suddenly you're adversaries, but then back to friends after that. But since you are about to open in Tannhäuser, tomorrow being October 5th, 2024, I want to tell you about this production because I have a very personal connection to that production you're going to sing in. Um, it was around April 1st, maybe March 31st of 2018. I was working in Berlin and knew that Tannhäuser was being done in the Deutsche Oper in West Berlin. And I got a ticket. And it was announced that the scenery had broken and the stage equipment had broken. And I seem to recall there was Ricarda Merbeth was Elizabeth, and I genuinely don't recall who the tenor was. It might have been Stephen Gould. And you'll understand why I don't recall much of anything. I can tell you Donald Runnels was conducting. And basically everyone on the stage in the show had to, at the last minute, they almost canceled, adapt to the fact that the scenery was frozen in place. And all the transformations from the Venusberg to the Wartburg and so on, all of that was gone. And it was
Oof.
just the gray set, and the chorus was placed in different places. And they stood there or sat there. The people singing the principal roles came out and they sang, and it was kind of like opera in concert on a broken stage. However, because of the absence of scenic design and effects, all the musicians, including especially the orchestra and conductor Donald Runnels, really pulled out all the stops musically because they didn't have to move around, let's say. They didn't have to do action. And Donald Runnels conducted the best Wagnerian performance I'd ever heard, I think. That plus James Levine in New York in the Ring. But it was just a spectacular performance. And at the end of the second act, which is to me one of the greatest acts in all of opera, I suddenly had this terrible pain in my jaw. And I didn't know why. It was so thrilling and so engrossing, this opera, that I was clenching my teeth.
You're grinding your teeth
I broke a
unconscious.
tooth. I broke a tooth.
No,
I've never before since broken a tooth in an opera house. And
this
I was so
the price
engrossed.
of this is the price of art, Fred.
Yeah, but I was so engrossed, and
The price of passion.
it was so incredibly thrilling, this performance. It
I
goes
believe it.
down as one of the great opera performances I've ever been to, and
Oh, that's
I've been to 200 Tannhäusers at least, but
wow.
there was just something about that one. Runnels, the conducting, the singers, the fact that everyone in the moment realized they had to make the opera work, not as a
Yeah,
concert.
you got
They
to
had to
step it
bring
up. Yeah,
all the drama to this
right, right,
moment.
right. What'd you
So,
do about what did you do about Act Three then? Did you tell me you stayed around even despite the broken
oh,
tooth?
I was bleeding. I saved around three. I'll be blunt. I went to the bathroom. I got some toilet paper. I stuffed it right here.
These 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 opera houses and these patrons, they've seen it all. I think it was.
Yeah, it's true. But the thing was, the Rome narrative, which is to me is so deeply moving in the third act,
Mm.
and the ending, which to me is the most gorgeous ending in all of opera, along with Lohengrin and Gottesdammerung and Valkyrie and a bunch of others, and Andrea Chenier. It felt particularly long that night because I felt the blood in my mouth, but it was okay. It really was. I got dental care after, but it really was okay. And the fact that music and performance can do that, at least to me, but not just me,
No, no,
so
no.
completely overtake you and engage you. I don't have enough teeth to keep going to opera and breaking my teeth all the time. But I remember, I always think of that moment because anyone who says you cannot be moved by music, by art, by drama, in this case, by the story of Tannhäuser, because he is, let's say, a flawed man, but he's an extraordinary, to me, an extraordinary man.
Yeah.
Much criticized. Let me ask a question that relates to this. John Vickers, one of the great Helden tenors of all time, fantastic actor, someone I got to work with a lot, never sang Tannhäuser. He did sing Siegmund, who has his, Siegmund sleeps with his sister. So he's not morally what we consider on the up and up. But Vickers always said that he would not sing Tannhäuser because of his so-called moral and ethical flaws. And I don't know. I find Tannhäuser an incredibly complex man, one who keeps renewing his faith, one who pushes on, one who is open to his own frailties, to his own desires, to his willingness to speak outside of what is expected and conventional because he believes in saying what he says, not to offend, but just it's a freedom of speech thing. Everything about that character moves me. I know that you're pretty recent in the character, and he's still living within you and growing within you. Tell me about Tannhäuser, the character as you see him and as you feel him.
No, I don't disagree with any of the way you've characterized anything so far. I think you're right because it's him. It's something stirring within him. It's just at the very outset from the Vader's I mean, he literally wakes up. He says, "What's his first word? Zu viel. This is enough. I've been here now. I've engaged in all like the carnal pleasures of the flesh that any um any secular whatever idealization could sell to a man. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not enough. He's in this dark cave. Yeah, of course, there's a lot of pretty ladies, and he's been doing a lot of wild things, but he misses the sunshine. He misses the fresh air. He misses nature. He misses things like as God intended them to be. And he really what's it? And that's the first thing he says. What's the last thing he says? He says, "Mein Heil liegt in Maria. Mein Heil for my salvation from you lies in getting back into the Catholic way,
Right.
into and seeking redemption that way." And of course, as we see, the next thing we hear is pilgrims singing, and he's just as contrite as he can be, and he gets back and he tries to put his life together, but then, like you say, he's a human being. He's back in respectable society, and then what? And then what? He hears all these people singing about something they know nothing about. All these poets. I mean, all these other
That's the
Zanger,
second act of the
Zanger
singing
Creed
competition.
colleagues.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're getting up and all this high language about love, and it's all idealized form. And he's like, "You guys don't know anything." And of course, then Gisbey pulls back to that side. Well, then, as we know, Elizabeth then pleads for him not to be like immediately beheaded. And so, what does he want to do? He says, "Okay, well, okay." And so Hermann says, "Okay, you have one. There's one way of redemption. It lies at your feet, and you choose it or you die. And you might actually die even if you do it, but this is your only chance." So he goes to Rome, and he's serious. What's the Rome tale you said a minute ago? It's just it's a poignant piece, and he says, how many different times does he say, "I chose the hard path"? Even among the pilgrims, I was the most hardcore of the pilgrims. Some of the pilgrims chose to walk on the grass. I chose to walk bare feet on the gravel. Everyone else was admiring the beautiful Italian countryside as they pilgrimized. He says, "I put on a blindfold so I couldn't even see it." And so he's doing everything he knows to do, and it still somehow isn't enough to get the Pope to to give him the
Absolution.
absolution. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can understand. I say, yeah, someone who's as fiercely Protestant as Mr. Vickers, I can understand why maybe the very
Yeah.
tail end of it being a redemption from or what is it the foliage blooming again on the
Right. What
Pope's
happens is
the Pope's cane is
he has a walking staff,
right.
and the
Yep.
Pope says, "You will get absolution if this blossoms, if this blooms."
Wie diese Stab in
Right.
meiner Hand.
And the very last line as he dies is Heilige Elisabeth, bitte für mich. In other words,
Yeah,
he has
pray for
been
me. Yeah.
drawn between these two women. And I would make the argument that Venus, who is the woman he's consorted with for a long time, is a good woman. She's a good person. She's caring. Her sense, she's not, they used to call it the mountain of ill repute where she lives, but it's really not that. She is more physical, more carnal, but there's not, in her view, and I think maybe in Tannhäuser's conflicted view, not anything wrong with that. But for him, it was just not enough.
Well,
And
in all of your tooth chattering and blood tasting and set malfunctions, do you remember that the production had Venus and Elizabeth played by the same singer?
Ricardo Merbeth, yeah,
But it was Ricardo doing both, and
yeah,
that's the conception. And then it's the same exact thing you're talking about. That it's they chose to go more nuanced way of being like, no one's like totally good or totally evil. It's sort of like the yin and the yang, the darkness that exists in everyone, no matter how wonderful they like to think themselves, or like the good that is in some people that others around that person only see as bad, and there's good in them. And so that's why they chose to have the same.
and by the way,
The same.
that precedent goes at least back 60 years when
Yeah.
Birgit Nielsen recorded the performance of Tannhäuser and sang both Venus and Elizabeth on the album, because the two characters are never singing at the same time.
Is
So
that the first? Is that the first instance of that in history?
I don't know the
If you told
first,
me
but it
yes,
was
I believe
my
you.
first experience of it. When I was a
Yeah, yeah,
kid and
yeah.
I heard it, and I thought, wow.
I say it's sort of a modern thing. It's sort of a what's the word? Uh, Reductionist um, the word deconstructivist idea that
Right.
might not have been popular until something like Nielsen's time.
But it's an opera that women stage directors, women audience members, women who love Wagner, women who sing Wagner, um, can justifiably say that's a very masculine oriented view. Although I would argue
Yeah,
that although Tannhäuser to me is a fascinating character, the most compelling character is Elizabeth. And she's the one who shows great courage and intelligence. She's 18, but she's mature well beyond her years. Um, I saw many women do it. Deborah Voigt was fabulous, but the one I sort of learned it on was Leonie Rieseneck because I worked on a production that had her and Grace Bunbury and Richard, who I'm suddenly forgetting his name. I'm sorry, Richard Castley,
Cassidy.
um, and James McCracken before that, actually.
My
And
goodness,
but
I didn't know McCracken sang Tannhäuser. That's cool.
1977 at the Met,
I'd like to get a handle on that.
it was sensational. Um, and a young Kathleen Battle was the shepherd.
Yep,
Yeah,
I knew that. I actually knew that she was cast as the Shepherd Boy
it
sometimes.
was
Yeah.
quite the cast. But the thing was that Rieseneck, who I don't ever name favorite opera singers because I have hundreds of favorite opera singers, but there was no one like Leonie Rieseneck. And she was warm and compassionate and temperamental in the best sense. Um, the most amazing actress, but also the amazing colleague. She never hogged the stage. Her acting with her back was better than most people's acting with their front. And in the Met production, she would, at the very end, after she sings her prayer, she walks up the stage incredibly slowly to Wagner's music. And you could see her back telling you that she knows this is it. When she comes back down this hill again, she'll be carried in a bier in a by people because she's dead, and she's
Mm.
laid to rest there. And that's when Tannhäuser comes back after she's been looking for him. She believes in him. And
Mm.
by the way, to me, the most gorgeous music in the whole opera is one that most people ignore. It's in the second act before the singing competition, where the two of them are sitting and talking, and it's just a conversation. But what the orchestra does at that moment is just so incredibly exquisitely gorgeous. And Wagner wrote a lot of gorgeous music, but to me, that whole opera, every moment of it is really amazing. And if you're a baritone, you get great music too.
It's just your leader of it
Yeah,
when you're
yeah.
Volver, isn't it? I
It's
mean,
it's
Volver.
it's right. It's remarkable. And by the way, for people who don't know, he wrote it in the 1840s, reflecting the political issues of Germany and Europe, but especially Germany, which was not yet Germany in the 1840s. It was a revolutionary time, but then revised for Paris in 1861, in which he inserted the famous Venusberg ballet that had a lot of nudity and showed all the men of the Jockey Club of Paris, their mistresses wearing not much clothing on the stage, and there was a riot. So people talk about Tannhäuser and the riot in Paris. But I think by now we can get to the fact that it's, to me, it's about everything about being a human being who understands imperfection, who understands what we strive for and what we don't achieve for, but having ideals. And I tend to love operas, usually with tenors, um, who have ideals. So Andrea Chenier, La Clemenza di Tito, Fidelio, these are roles where the men have ideals, and even if they struggle and often pay the price for it in one way or another, they honor their convictions, and that to me is more interesting than an Alfredo and Traviata. Love him though I do musically, but these men, and these are the men that you're on the path to play if you haven't played them already. Have you done Andrea Chenier?
I haven't. It's on the list of things to learn, though. I've
Yeah,
I've sung the improviso a couple of times in concerts with orchestra, actually,
yeah.
in on Italian themed concerts. I've done it before. But I was just up with John Frederick West recently, and we were talking about how we're kind of reaching the end of the Wagner stuff that I need to work and routine and coach with him, and now we should
Let's talk about
dust
John
off some of the.
West, who is from Ohio.
Yep.
I've heard him in a lot of Wagnerian performances. Marvelous singer and your teacher, right? When did
Yes,
you meet and talk about your working and personal relationship with John Frederick West?
I first heard the name from Matthew Epstein at that same consultation when he told me that made his Wagner Strauss prediction. And it's the first I'd ever heard John's name. He says, this is a singer who is started his career like doing the things you're doing the standard rep Italian to heavy Italian stuff, and then made a switch, and then never looked back. I mean, by never looked back, I mean basically, definitely left the Cavaradossis and Rodolfos and the Pinkertons in the past, and then focused on the Koloffs, to the extent that his Italian to the extent of his Italian rep, but it became 80% German and 20% or less of Italian. Um, so I want to say that's what I heard the name first, and then some years later, I'm an apprentice artist up at Glimmerglass, singing
Which is in
Italian.
upstate New York at Cooperstown, for people who don't know.
That's right. The Baseball Hall of Fame is very nearby. um, I
Are you
I
an Atlanta
did.
Braves fan?
I am. Yeah, we were more than fair weather fans even back in the '80s, back before Ted Turner even bought it. And we would go, and we knew they were going to lose, but we went, and we just sort of committed to the experience and ate our Cracker Jacks. And the joke back then was the Braves were so bad when you would call the ticket office to find out when the first pitch was going to be thrown, they'd ask, "I don't know, what time can you get here?" That was the joke. Um,
Just for,
but we,
I
we
mean,
were happy to live through the Ted Turner revolution and end up getting to the World Series in '91 and then winning in '95.
I
Of
can
course,
tell
winning.
listeners who don't know that in America, people who love opera tend to love baseball. There's a lot of commonality in that. And I mean that very seriously. I've written a lot about that, about the timing, about the protagonism of the pitcher and the catcher and the batter. That
I need to
all
read
the other
this.
things are about scoring points and gaining territory, whereas you play in a field, in a garden, it's a different shape. It's almost like an opera house when you are in a baseball diamond, and the depth,
Yeah,
it's very similar. And every artist or every player gets his or her moment, and
yeah, yeah.
it's really very wonderful. And people
Oh,
like Robert Merrill, the great American baritone,
oh,
sang for
on
the
call.
Yankees. My
Yeah,
friend Andrew Garland, who I love, even though he's a Boston Red Sox fan, um, has sung at ball games. And there's Renee Fleming. It's a very strong tradition, but it's because the fans also, it's a summer game, tend to go to baseball in the summer and then come back to the opera houses in the fall through the spring, winter and spring, and then they tend to go back to baseball. I mentioned this only because the last game I went to this season, your Atlanta Braves completely whooped the New York Mets. But it was just such an embarrassingly bad game for the
it's a
Mets.
rivalry. It's a
Yeah, I
rivalry.
know. It is a rivalry, and that's very interesting. It's kind of like Collis and Tibaldi. There's that same feeling. And I'm not pushing a point, but it really, people who love baseball tend to love opera. There's people who
I,
love physical sports like football tend to love ballet, but something about opera and baseball that really go together.
there's been many times I remember sitting, in a costume, about to be called to the stage, and not really wanting to be called to the stage. Is on my phone. I'm following, pitch by pitch, and it's
Yeah.
about World Series time. Always, there's always some big opera performance on some significant World Series game. I got to go to one World Series game when I was singing my one and only Faust ever out
Mm-hmm.
in a small company in St. Louis called Winter Opera St. Louis, and I was staying with some amazing amazing pals who were diehard, Cardinals fans. Of course, that's actually, as you know, a big, also decent sized rivalry of Braves and Cardinals. But I put on my Cardinal hat that night and went and enjoyed my one and only World Series game of my life, and I still have the rally rag somewhere.
By
It
the
was
way,
fun.
for people who don't know, the New York Yankees of my team have won more World Series than any other team. Do you know what team has won the second most? Do you know what team has won the second most? The St. Louis Cardinals.
What was the Cardinals?
They're a very fine team. The
Didn't know
Braves are
that.
interesting. They were born in Boston. They lived for many years in Milwaukee, and then they came to Atlanta.
The poor
And
Braves.
but no, they're a very fine team.
The
Hank
poor Braves
Aaron,
that always they have an amazing. They're always amazing during the season, and always have. We figure out some creative way to collapse every September, but we're not now. I don't think I
oh, I
haven't
know.
actually checked. That's
Anyway, back to opera. But the thing is, the way we're passionate about baseball is the way we're passionate about opera. I'm going to turn a bit because you were talking a bit about Calaf and Turandot, and you have begun a relationship with a wonderful theater that I've worked at that many people don't know, the Teatro Lirico Giuseppe Verdi in Trieste.
you have a history with Trieste. That's
I have a
cool. I had no idea.
long,
Not a
I wrote
clue.
a whole book about it. I have a very long, very deep relationship with the city of Trieste and the whole region of Friuli, Venezia, Giulia, of which is the capital.
Yeah.
Trieste, to me, is one of the greatest cities in the world. And I commend to listeners a book by Jan Morris, my favorite writer, about Trieste. She wrote a book
Huh.
just about Trieste. I wrote mine first, and she contacted me and she said, "Do you mind if I write a book about Trieste?" I said, "Mind, on the
Oh
contrary, I will read anything you write."
my
And
gosh, Fred, I
Trieste,
had no idea. That's so
it's a
cool.
very special city. Um, because Trieste is, let me make a long, long story short. Friuli Venezia Giulia is the northeast. It's on the Adriatic. It's east of Venice. Near between Venice and Trieste is Aquileia. Aquileia was the ancient Roman colony on the Adriatic. There was no Venice and there was no Trieste. And
Oh,
from Aquileia, the Romans built roads to a place called Vidibona, which became Vienna, to Salzburg, to Ljubljana, to Budapest. All those cities that grew from Aquileia. When Attila the Hun attacked Aquileia at the end of the Roman Empire, the people of Aquileia, especially women, fled to 118 islands that were abandoned in the northern Adriatic, and they rose. Aquileia rose like the phoenix, Phoenicia, Venezia, Venice, and they created the foundations of Venice came from Aquileia and from the Roman traditions of making glass, which became bottles in Venice, perfumery, grape growing, which is around there, which became not just wine, but the alcohol for perfume from the flowers. Everything that happened in Venice was born from the traditions of Aquileia. Trieste became the Roman port, but at the same time, in 1318 or 1361, it was taken over by the Austrian Empire. And from 1361 to 1918, it belonged to Vienna and was the third city after Prague, Budapest. It was then Trieste in the Austrian Empire. When people see the Sound of Music and they say, "What do you mean Captain von Trapp is in the Austrian Navy? He lives in Salzburg." No, the Austrian Navy was in Trieste. So Trieste combines Roman traditions, including pork butchery, with Viennese importation of wood, so violin making, furniture making, all of that went to Vienna. The first refrigerated car in the world on a rail went from Trieste to Vienna with fish from the Adriatic that would be caught at night in the Adriatic and be in the market, the Naschmarkt in Vienna, in the morning. And
Fred, time out. When I do my next engagement there, which is Flying Dutchman in March, the next day I am due for Tannhäuser rehearsals in Vienna, and I was just on the phone. Like my management is on the phone with them trying to figure out how I can get via car So if I end up on that same path, I'll freak out. That's so
You
cool.
will, but
Oh my
the
gosh.
Romans built that, and the Viennese reinforced it with a rail line.
Uh-uh.
And so,
Ah,
yeah, it's there. You'll go to Udine and then up to Visio and then Vienna. And
you Renaissance man, you know all this stuff. Yeah, tell me something. Did the border? So how much further into like what's now Slovenia was the Italian? But well, I guess there weren't any borders
okay,
like in
so
ancient times.
it used to be that all of that land was under Austria.
It's
And
oh,
when you see operas like The Merry Widow, when they talk about these countries, these little duchies, it was sort of based on that. And what you have are Slovenia, Istria, the Istrian Peninsula, which is where Trieste is,
yes.
Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Montenegro, all those Albania right there. But Trieste was sort of the pearl on the Adriatic, along with Dubrovnik, but especially Trieste. And it was the place where coffee, it was the coffee port of Europe, and therefore the Viennese, as well as the Italian coffee tradition, came out of Trieste. So Illy Cafe, Hausbrand, a lot of those brands, Creme Cafe, were all in Trieste. And so then Joseph Meinl in Vienna, the coffee importation came through Trieste. So it's a remarkably fascinating, unusual city because it looks a little like Venice in some ways, but it looks like Vienna because the central district where the opera house is called the Borgo Teresiano. It's named for Empress Maria Theresa, who basically conceived of Trieste being Vienna by the sea. And
This
the
is I mean,
architect,
this is crazy. Like because Sarah said when we were just there this summer for tour
right,
dot,
yeah,
I remember
uh-huh,
we were right there in that whole the plaza right in front of the opera house. And she was like, I look around and I just think Munich. I think it looks so German, but obviously we're not in Germany. That's why
yep.
this is a conversation we had like the day we landed there. Amazing.
Well, when you go a little up the coast, there's the castle of Miramare, and Miramare is
Yeah,
where
yeah, yeah.
the Habsburgs would have their romantic retreats. And
Oh,
Duino, when Rilke wrote his Duino elegies, to me, some of the greatest poetry and very Tannhäuser in a way, he wrote them on the path walking near Miramare to Duino. So I do hope while you're there that you get to Duino Miramare and that you go up to Aquileia because you'll understand it. Because in 1846, when the Austrians dominated Venice and this whole area,
uh,
they built the bridge that goes the mainland of Venice into this old city, and they destroyed part of Venice to build the railway station, um, Santa Lucia. And but what they did was the Venetians were so outraged that the Austrians would basically destroy old Venice that Verdi was invited to go to the theater in, I believe it was La Fenice, but I'm not certain. And he wrote an opera called Attila about Attila the Hun, which was about the destruction of Aquileia, the birth of
mhm.
Venice, basically everything I just told you. And to me, the greatest line in all of Verdi is in that opera, and it'll be on my tombstone if I have one. Avrai tu l'universo, resti l'Italia me. You can keep the universe, let Italy be mine. And it
Beautiful.
was about the destruction of the mainland and the building of the railway bridge that meant that Austrian trains could arrive from Vienna and pull into Old Venice, which was horrifying to the Italians. So every piece of land, if you read A Farewell to Arms by Hemingway, it's all set in that area. And when
Oh, wow.
he was nursed back to health, it was by a Friulian woman, Friuli being the region there. And it's so rich with culture and fascination. And I believe that anyone who wants to understand European culture needs to know that you're living in Berlin. Um, when Churchill spoke about the building of the Iron Curtain, it began in Berlin and it ended in Trieste. And everything east of that was, quote, communist. And everything west of that, apart from Berlin itself, was democratic, capitalist, whatever you want to call it. But the East and West were divided between Berlin and Trieste. So while many singers I know who live in Berlin go to other European capitals and they're great, I just love, frankly, that you're building a relationship with Trieste because, in addition to being a wonderful city, it will inform everything about the way you play your roles. That's why.
Oh my
And
gosh, this is always blowing my mind because so my time there was so brief. I got there actually a few days late because I was doing Act One Valkyrie with Lisa Davidson in Barcelona, and I actually had I think it was a couple of days late arrival for it, and then I had to leave immediately the next day after to have a late arrival into Munich to redo Parsifal. And so I was there a grand total of maybe, geez, like 16 days or something. And 3 of those days are performances, and basically every other day is rehearsals. I had the furthest we didn't even get over to Venice. We couldn't even get. We had like 2 days off, like the whole
you
the
don't
whole time I
have
was
to. I
there.
just want you to experience Trieste and its surroundings. Because,
Oh
for
no no no!
example, from the Piazza Oberdan, you can take a streetcar that goes back to the 1930s. You ask me how far east does Slovenia go and Trieste go?
Yeah,
That streetcar goes to the border, and you can go up in the mountains there, and suddenly they're all speaking Slovenian in Trieste, and
yeah,
they
yeah.
are eating different foods, wonderful foods, but just very different from down by the sea. They're drinking unusual wines. The coffee all over that place is some of the best coffee in the world. Better than Vienna, though I love Viennese coffee. It's just, to me, Trieste has the best coffee culture in the world,
Now,
and great pork products. If you, I don't know if you like pork, but my goodness, once you, I'll send you a restaurant. Once you taste that, you're spoiled. That's it. Even if you're from the southern part of the United States, where there's great pork,
or if you've lived in Germany this great long time,
Germany, you will
but
see once I
slather
send
everything in
you to
pork
this
products.
place. Once you see, it's a remarkable place.
So
And
did you ever go up to? I'm sure the answer is yes, but our performances of the Turandot were actually not in the Opera House. They were up at the Castel San Giusto. So
oh, really?
yeah, it was up in the courtyard there. They were all three, yeah, all three of the Turandots were outdoor shows.
Okay.
So well, we could maybe talk later. We don't want to
But
keep
you're doing the Flying Dutchman in the Opera House this
in the
Saturday.
Opera House.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I believe, and I'm just pulling this out of my head, that Verdi's opera Stiffelio premiered there. I'd have to check that. But I know that
Yeah,
he had one premiere in Trieste
why is his name on the Opera House? Is what I haven't
because
looked.
he
Haven't quite,
represents Italy. Because
of
part of the
course,
fascinating thing about Trieste is that it
it was
has
fought. It was
been,
fought over. Was the land
it was
fought
fought
over?
over. It belonged to Yugoslavia. It belonged
Uh-huh.
to Slovenia. It belonged to Italy. It belonged to Austria. Um, it only became part of Italy in 1954, even though World War II ended in 1945. Though it was occupied because the American and New Zealand troops, which were supposed to liberate Trieste, especially New Zealand,
Uh,
arrived just slightly after the Russians and the Serbs. And
yeah,
therefore, it had to be negotiated. And the whole hinterland, the whole back area behind Trieste, was given to Yugoslavia in exchange for Trieste becoming part of Italy. So the people of Trieste are very patriotic, and Verdi is the
right.
most patriotic composer. Something else
Oh,
to know about
easily, yeah,
Trieste,
easily.
not that you need this, you don't need this, but by far the most Viagra sold per capita of any city in Italy is in Trieste. And the reason for that is it's not available in the surrounding countries. So they come to
why
Trieste to buy
do
it.
you know this, Fred?
Well, I'm a Trieste expert. I love Trieste. And I
A
live,
Trieste spurt. I don't know. I'll come up
but
with a
another thing
combination.
about it, and I mean this seriously, is that it's very multicultural before any other Italian city was, in that there are six religions that coexist there. There's Catholicism, of course, there's Protestantism, there's a substantial Islamic community and always has been. There was, until World War II, a notable Jewish community. It and Budapest have the largest synagogues in Europe. There are about 500 Jews left. There is the Serbian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, and I'm leaving one out, probably a Christian faith. But there are 6 religions that coexist in Trieste, and because no one is the majority, they coexist. And I see Trieste as an example of what can be in the rest of the world if we would put aside our differences. Because these religions, yes, there are obviously problems at times, but because everybody in Trieste is from somewhere else, so to speak, unless you are an old family, you learn
Uh-huh.
multiple languages. You eat different foods from your own. You hear different music. And it's like New York City. And it's the only
Yeah, I
place
mean,
that's like that.
yeah, I just looking at it on the map, I remember thinking, gosh, I'm within like what 100, or I mean, way less. I'm within 5 or 6 kilometers from Croatia, right?
Yeah, you
I'm
can take the
within,
streetcar
I'm
to
within
Slovenia and
even
Croatia.
less to Slovenia,
Yeah,
and then obviously there's Austria to the north, and
yeah.
yeah.
So it's a wonderful place, and I really hope that you build an ongoing relationship with it because it's a city that teaches so much. And when
Here's
you
a
see
funny.
a role like Tannhäuser, and I mean this completely seriously, and his conflicts and his internal turmoil, you look at Trieste and you see how that city worked it out through terrible horrors, but also huge triumph. The
Hmm.
only concentration camp in Italy in World War II was built in Trieste, and it's
Hmm.
still there, San Saba, and it can be visited and should be visited.
I
It
didn't
was
know that.
a detention camp for refugees after the war, most of whom wound up either in Queens in New York City or in Australia.
Well, we'll go. My wife is descended from Holocaust survivors.
Okay. So
We should
you and
go.
I offline can talk about this, but I want to share this
Yeah,
with you
yeah.
online because many people who love opera don't know about this magnificent theater. And by the way, um, the man with whom I studied the most, I was his mentee, whatever you want to call it. I had a Fulbright in Milan, was Giorgio Strehler, the great stage director, and he was from Trieste. And it was he who took me to Trieste and explained to me why it was special. And
Hmm.
there are wonderful opera singers from there, primarily the beautiful and talented and delightful Daniela Barcelona. And I don't know if you've ever met her, worked with her,
And
but
I've heard the name. I didn't know this. I didn't know she was from
I'm
there.
going to hook you up. She's began in the Rossinian line and was sort of the
Uh-huh.
heir to the roles of Marilyn Horne, but has now gone to Verdi and dramatic roles, and she's marvelous and lovely, and she's Triestine. So I will introduce you, and if she's not singing elsewhere,
Oh,
you can meet her and
yeah.
her husband, who are music
Oh my
people.
goodness. Would love
Yeah.
to. Would love to.
So, getting back to you because I want to. You were talking about that you sort of feel that you have sung the Wagnerian roles you're going to sing. Obviously, you will continue to sing them and deepen them. What roles do you think you want to go do after? Is there any Strauss role, for example?
Yeah, yeah. There's a number of Strausses. There's a number of there's a number of non-German roles. I'd love to get going. Um, let's see. Still in the Italian rep. Um, I want to routine Turandot more, of course. I would love to do Fanciulla at some point. I would love to do
Let's talk about
Otello.
Fanciulla. Fanciulla being um, your character, Dick Johnson, which is a terrible name, um, is
Ramirez.
technically Ramirez is technically Mexican, and he's come north to Northern California in the mining camp during the gold rush. It's a beautiful opera by Puccini. It was composed for the Met and premiered in New York in 1910, not in Europe. And it has the characters don't die, which is unusual in Puccini and in opera in general. It has, you could say, a happy ending. Minnie, by the way, I recently on September 20th had the wonderful opera singer Barbara Daniels, who was one of our great Minnies, and we spoke about it so people can go back and hear that conversation about her interpretation of Minnie. But Minnie is one woman running a saloon out west, or reading her Bible and teaching Bible classes, and Dick Johnson, aka Ramirez, arrives there, and she has stirrings that she read about in the Bible but is not yet acknowledged in her own life.
Mhm.
And it's a people think it's hokey, but it's only hokey if you don't take seriously the emotions. But it's about honor. It's about cheating because she cheats the cards to get to save your life. Um, there's a horse in it very often. Um, but there's a lot of wistfulness and sadness and nostalgia and people missing home. There's one man who sings this beautiful aria in the first act about he can't hack it anymore in California. Go home. Yeah, it's just gorgeous. And so tell me about this character, Dick Johnson Ramirez, and you. How you
There's nothing. Alas, there's nothing to tell because I have not learned a note of it
okay.
knowing "Que la mi creda," but I have not studied the score. I know if someone drops the needle, as they say, I know it's on Chula, but I have not learned it at
Well, it's
all.
kind of
But
like
it's
Sir Thomas Beecham was rehearsing an orchestra in the 1950s, and one of the players in the orchestra, probably a viola, said, "But Maestro, I don't know this piece yet." And Beecham said, "Oh, you'll love it."
just it'll come naturally.
Yeah.
Good,
Well,
good.
you will
I
love it.
can't. I'm excited. John is very. John learned it.
John
In his
Frederick
years.
West.
He
Yeah.
actually John West, yeah, and just circumstances. He actually never got got to the stage with it, and not nothing on his fault. It was just
Yeah.
scheduling, and he just never actually ended up on the stage with it. And he really wants me to get it learned and get it coached so we can dig into it together. What else? What else? Chenier, we said earlier. I love you at
I
Chenier
think it's
now.
very, I mean, arguably my favorite opera sometimes, although Tannhäuser and Les Troyens. Oh, Les Troyens. How do you feel about Aeneas?
Oh, big, yeah, it's high on the list as well. That was going to
That
come.
was a vicar's specialty, and
Yeah, he said that was
Gregory
the hardest.
Clooney now sings it
Yeah,
magnificently.
oh yeah, I'm sure. I think Vickers said it was the hard. He was on the record as saying, and he had sang Tristan like a trillion times, but
Right.
he said that Troyan was the hardest thing he
It
ever
is because as long the
attempted.
tessitura remains very high.
It's real high, yeah, because you got that. Oh gosh, there's a high C at the. And it's like a passing note high C, and then like Act 5 or something, and in the big aria. Yeah, I have a score. It's over there on the shelf. I just have it of Les
Now, if
Troyens
I
on
remember,
the list.
there's a character named Yopas, Llopas, I think, and he has one sort of sea chanty song like the Sailor and Tristan. And I always tell people who want to sing Aeneas, start by learning that song because
My
it'll get
but
you into the Berlioz thing, and then you go on to Aeneas.
the Berlioz thing. I did once the was it Nuit d'Ivresse, the duet.
The duet in
I
Act
did that
Two.
one time on a concert. I mean, it was a long time ago with my great friend Jennifer Feinstein. That's his friend.
Sure.
We did it at a concert I think in Indianapolis when we were both there as young artists. Um, and I know the aria like I mean I know it. I mean I've listened to it a lot, mainly Vickers, like only Vickers. Um, but I have one of my best friends in the entire universe lives right here, just a few miles away from me, and is a full-time chorister now at Deutsche Oper Berlin, but has had a quite a respectable solo career on his own way, and also another Georgia tenor, John Irvin.
Okay.
John and I did apprentice stuff in Central City. We actually were roommates in Boston. We still had the same church in Atlanta. Then and then he was a Ryan Center
Mhm.
apprentice for 3 years in
Chicago. Yeah.
Chicago, and now he's ended up over here. And of course, like I said, he's in the chorus at Deutsche Oper, but he's still still pursuing the solo life. And his calling card is the La Damnation.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
he's done the Berlioz Faust a bunch of times. And I asked him, I was like, hey, is there even anything? Because I don't even know enough about Le Troyen to know that there was like a lyric tenor as opposed to the held tenor, in addition rather to the held tenor. And he was like, oh yeah, and he said the same role you just mentioned. And so maybe when I do mine, we can make each other writers on each other's contracts, something. Make sure that we
And here's another
listen to them.
suggestion, not because you may sing it, but just to study it. The Berlioz Requiem only has a
I
tenor
studied.
part.
I studied that that was my undergrad degree, was actually choral. It was a music education degree, but with a sort of choral influence. Yeah, I
Mhm.
remember that being one. And L'Enfance du Christ.
Right.
I've sung some choral numbers from that. It's just wonderful stuff.
And then for more fun, study Benvenuto Cellini by Berlioz, which is a
I've attended
thrilling
barely.
opera.
I saw some friends of mine do that in Opera Köln back in 2015 or something like that. Some time ago now. But the production was so cool. My great friend Emily Hendricks, a great American soprano.
He's
She's
the most
that
underrated
ensemble.
opera composer, in my view. It's the only composer I refer to by his first name. I talk about Verdi and Wagner and Puccini, but I refer to Hector because
Big
I feel
Hector. Yeah.
very close to him in terms of his aesthetic, and there's something about his orchestrations that I find very congenial. And he and
Hmm.
Rossini anticipated so much of what Wagner and Verdi and others did later on, and Meyerbeer. They
Hmm.
they got it first. And Rossini is thought of as being, an overeater who could write pretty melodies. Now, it said he was the most remarkable diverse composer in terms of comedies and everything, and dramas and tragedies. But
Hmm.
Berlioz was again so special with the orchestra
Yeah.
and what he expressed, and his yeah, just nothing like him. So, have I left anything out that we you wanted to cover? I feel like we have, I've never met you, but I really feel we sort of bonded over shared passions of, what you sing and what I love to hear people sing.
Well, we bonded over shirts initially, I think.
That's true. Yes, we are not shrinking violets.
I don't know what's the point of that.
Yeah. But, I do want to say, because it's an important honor, congratulations again on the Richard Tucker Award. It is, it's like the Academy Award, the Oscar of American opera singing.
I
And
know. I was so stunned. I never won awards, man, and I did all the competitions, all of them. And so having given up on that, like, or slash aged out of that
yeah,
10 years ago or more, I don't think about competitions. I don't think about lifetime achievement awards. I don't think about things like the Tucker Award. I never even did the Tucker competitions. And I said I did a lot of them. Actually, never did those. Anyway, so I was thoroughly blown away. It took quite a while for the shock to wear off.
yeah. It
It hasn't fully worn off, to be honest.
it is something that you can carry with you for the rest of your life, really. Because people who may not be from the United States or be familiar with our scene here, I mean, Richard Tucker himself was an extraordinary figure. And he was born, just so we know, on August 28th of 1913 and died January 8th of 1975 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He was born in New York. And his wife, Sarah, who I actually met and ate her food, was a wonderful cook because her family owned a catering hall on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, kosher. Her brother was Yaakov Perelmuth, I think the name was, who became Jan Pierce. So the fact that she had a brother who was one of the great rabbinical tenors, cantorial tenors, Richard Tucker being the other, they both had remarkable careers. Richard
And
Tucker was, yes,
that their timbres were also quite similar too. I think that's
yeah.
kind of cool. I mean, you
Well,
can tell a
because
difference. The trained ear, of course, but they were in the same, really similar same line of
yeah,
rep. Yep.
and Tucker made his Met debut in 1945 and sang solidly for 30 years and was so reliably in so many different kinds of roles, mostly Italian, some French. One of his last roles that he studied being La Juive by Olivet. And he was a prankster. He was known for his jokes, but he was a loving colleague to people like Robert Merrill, especially, but
Oh
also
yeah.
Leontine Price. And as often I do, I asked you to go through the Adagio catalog and identify certain music and certain recordings on there that particularly speak to you. And
Mm.
we can talk about many, but I'm going to talk about one particularly because I love it too. The Madama Butterfly that was recorded in Rome in 1960 with Richard Tucker and Leontine Price in the
Yeah.
leads and Rosalind Elias as Suzuki. And it was conducted by Eric Leinsdorf. And I once, years ago, had an hour with Leontine Price just to talk. And I said to her, "You are most known for your Verdi." And she said, "That's right." And I said, "But I'm guessing the role you feel closest to is Madame Butterfly." And she burst into tears. And I said, I'm sorry if I upset you. She said, "No, no one's ever said that to me before. Why do you think that?" And she said, "Because I associate it with making that recording in Rome, because I was alone. And there were the Tuckers with their three sons. And they welcomed me into their home. And it was the Jewish holidays and it was the Christian holidays. And we celebrated all of them. And it
Mm.
made me feel like their family. And I saw how Sarah Tucker interacted with her children. And I took what I saw, that love that she lavished on her sons, and I inserted that in any way I could as my performance of Madame Butterfly. And I said, "So, Miss Price, when you hear that," she said, "I can't listen to it." She said, "I love it." And she was in tears, beautiful tears. It brings back everything I felt about that experience. So for her, for us who listen to it, it's a gorgeous recording. But for her, it was also how she felt making it and what she felt about Richard and Sarah Tucker in that moment, and how her association was
Yeah.
not just the recording and the often difficult Eric Leinsdorf who conducted, but um, but the fact that something about the experience poured into her
Yeah.
role and her performance of it that we don't see. We just hear it on disc and or streaming or whatever. And it's an amazing thing. Why is
Yeah.
the
Not.
recording of yours?
Yeah. Yeah. None of that is the slightest bit surprising. I've always thought about that. I even describe it when I've over whatever the last 20 years or something. When did I first shoot this recording? Maybe 2003 or something like that. And and I remember thinking that she's doing something. There's something extra with this one. Like there's an extra something going on. And I've even said it. I've even articulated it as it almost sounds like she's singing like a spiritual. It almost
Yeah.
sounds like she's singing an African American spiritual. And that I mean, like she even puts like little grace notes and little Snoopy notes because it seems to be pouring directly out of her soul. And I that's the recording I've got. Oh, that's the I'm trying to think. How am I trying to say this? Of all my favorite recordings, that's the one that's got Richard Tucker, in the lead
Yeah.
tenor. And I just remember, yeah, and the way he sang it too. I mean, man,
Beautiful.
when he got above, especially, I mean, it was a glorious voice throughout, but when he got above the staff, it was just like it was so wild and exciting. Um, I just, I mean, I probably had to buy a second copy of it because I'd worn out the physical CD so much.
What else you
From
love about that recording, neither Richard Tucker nor Leontine Price looked like what we think of as those characters.
good point.
And
That's a good point.
what we experienced was complete vocal acting and extraordinary singing.
And it
And when
works.
you
My goodness,
listen
it
to
works.
it and you hear them singing, you completely know and believe it, which is why when people say to me, "Oh, but so and so doesn't look like that character," whatever they think the character should look like, I answer, "Yeah, but they sound like it. They feel the character."
And that's what
And that's
matters.
all you need to know.
For
Um,
for for the listeners out there, Fred's just referred to. So that was two of my five. I submitted
Yeah.
five singers that inspired me, and one of them was Price, and one of them was Tucker from this recording.
And
That's why
John
he's
Frederick
asking about it.
West was another about
And
whom we
John
spoke, and Franco Corelli,
and Codelli, and I think was it Merrill. I just
Robert
love the
Merrill.
earthy. I love the earthy way Merrill sang. I love that.
Mhm.
You know, people said, of course, obviously I never had the privilege of seeing him live or anything. I missed that by a number of decades, actually, sadly. But that people say that perhaps he wasn't like the greatest actor or something. But there's something about the honesty of his like production of sound, and like there's like this earthy sort of oaky quality that's just you feel like you just sort of I don't know bear hug it or something and feel some sort of like energy and comfort or something all at the same time. That oaky um, super masculine, I guess you could say, sound that just
There
thrilling.
was for
And,
many
in my
decades.
opinion, and I love that, I really appreciate. I know the purists won't agree with me, but how Schulte would add all the brass, the extra brass that Verdi
Yeah,
wasn't considering in the 1840s, but Schulte had because it's so exciting.
I wonder if that was the Chicago Symphony or perhaps London or Vienna. I'll have to check.
So yeah, Schulte, it's Merrill, it's Krauss, Anamafo. I
Beverly
said it's the
Hill,
link. I sent you the link in the
Anamafo,
email.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
Anamafo.
no, the reason I'm asking about Robert Merrill is the following: that we had for decades a broadcaster who broadcast Yankee baseball here, and I'm forgetting if his name was Bill Mazer or Lee Mazer, but I think it was Bill Mazer. But
Yeah.
because he knew Robert Merrill, because Robert Merrill sang the national anthem so many times at Yankee Stadium, let's call him Bill Mazer, was convinced that Robert Merrill had to have been the best opera singer of all time. So I was often on his radio program, and we talk about the Yankees. And then he'd say, "Well, Fred, I know you like opera. Yeah, I do. And did you ever hear Robert Merrill? Of course. And do you think he was the greatest baritone of all time?" Now, I can never go on the record of saying any singer was the greatest of anything of all time. I happened to study with Tito Gobi, who did not have the beautiful voice that Robert Merrill had, but Tito Gobi had all kinds of other things. Um, Merrill had a beautiful technique and a beautiful sound and a beautiful security in his singing, and he was very expressive. And I found it interesting that he happened to be part of this generation of Jewish New Yorkers, along with Richard Tucker, Jan Pierce, Roberta Peters, Regina Resnick, in a way Beverly Sills, but she was not part of that group, who performed together, lived together, worshiped together, sometimes disagree with one another, but nonetheless, they were part of a generation right after World War II, because Jews were not really allowed to sing much. They were discriminated against before. But when World War II came and many of the European artists could not come to the United States, suddenly the Regina Resnicks and Tuckers and Pierces and later Roberta Peters in 1950 or so um,
Mm,
came to prominence because we didn't have the European singers. And that was the
yeah.
opportunity for Americans and also, thank goodness, African Americans like Leontine Price, finally Marian Anderson and many others, William Warfield, and then Martina Arroyo and Grace Bumbry and so forth, to come forth. But it was because of World War II and the absence of European singers here that American opera singers suddenly gained more prominence. They sang before, obviously, but they gained more prominence because of World War II, and that was a very important thing.
Hmm.
So, and you, my friend, are part of that tradition.
Couldn't be more honored. And also, when I spoke with Barry the morning when Barry called me to
Harry
tell me that I
Tucker,
had been selected,
Richard's
Barry
son.
Tucker,
Beryl was
son
his
of
Jewish
Richard.
name.
So what was his Jewish name?
Berel, Beryl.
Beryl. Okay. So Barry was telling me that despite the fact that Richard had a lifelong conscious aversion to Richard Wagner's music for understandable reasons, that he was actually in the process of learning Lohengrin when he passed away.
Really? Wow.
That is a fact that Barry told me directly, and I was shocked to hear it. But
Yeah.
delighted also. because I believe I am fortunate enough to be the first held in anything that has been the
You are.
recipient of this
That's
amazing
true
prize.
that you are the first person in that line, so to speak. The tenors who have preceded you are mostly in the Italian repertory.
Yeah, you have
Um,
a variety of it. Yeah, a large span of tenor types,
yeah.
but none in the Helden. Yeah.
So you're like Tanois. You break all the records. You leave everything behind you and you move forth. It was really a pleasure to speak with you, and I look
Fred, my
forward.
pleasure entirely. I can't wait to get back there and meet you in person. And when I actually am able to come to a gala, we're hoping it'll be next year because the next year will be the 50th anniversary gala of the
That's
prize. So
right.
hopefully the Carnegie will be available and
Will
and
be.
not booked.
But
We
in the
hope.
meantime, I will set you up for everything in Trieste because it's a
Oh,
fabulous.
I'll buy your book today. I'll buy it tonight. I
Thank
want to
you.
read it before I go back. I'm excited
Thank
about it.
you. No, it's there's nothing like it in the world, and I'm very happy that you're forming a relationship with that city, and they with you. They're very smart to get you because they do operetta. They do a little bit more German stuff than a lot of Italy, although Bologna and Milan do. Um, and it's great. So congratulations, Clay Hilley. It's terrific, and you make us proud, even if you root for the Atlanta Braves.
It's not. Let's be honest. It's not a great rivalry. It's not a huge rivalry with the Yankees. Never,
No, I know.
never was. Never. Maybe it was when they were in Boston. I wouldn't know. But anyway, we'll
Long
talk
time
about
ago.
that some other time.
Yeah.
Pleasure talking to you, my dear.
Okay, Clay, I'll see you soon.
Indeed.